Hey, this is Chris at Highline Guitars, and you're watching episode 112 from the Luthier's Workbench. And in this episode, I'm going to be starting a new project, which I'll probably be talking about in the next several episodes from the Luthier's Workbench. And the project is going to be a guitar specifically for kids, or it could be for adults who want to try a smaller guitar. The scale length of this guitar is going to be 22.5 inches. The fretboard will have 22 frets. And the body will be roughly 80-85% of the actual full-size version that I also do. And I'm going to be calling this guitar the Echo Mini. So it's going to use my new double cutaway Echo body shape, but as I said, it's going to be a little bit smaller. And it's also going to be a little thinner. Normally I make my bodies 1 3/4 inches thick. This one's going to be 1.5 inches thick. And I'm going to be using alder, which will make a nice lightweight body. And in this episode, what I'll be talking about specifically is how I prepare the neck blank. So let's get started. Now, I've always been really partial to angled headstocks, and that's what I use on all of my guitar builds. And to do it, I do a scarf joint. But what I do is I start out with a big chunk of wood like this. This is slightly more than 1 inch thick, and this is maple. And what I do is I take it over to my bandsaw and I cut an angle. So this part was originally like this. And I cut at an angle through, liberating this end. And what I'll do is I'll flip it over and I will glue it back to this part like so, and I'll have my angled headstock, and then I can cut out the rest of the shape. When I cut the angle for the headstock on my bandsaw, the first thing I have to do is I have to figure out exactly where that angle is going to be. And to do that, I consult my plans. And what I've done in the plans is I've created a top view and a side view of not just the finished neck itself, but the blank that it's going to be cut from. And then what I'll do is I will mark the angle that I need to cut. Then I'm ready to take it over to my bandsaw. Now, I don't use any jigs or any special contraptions to set things up so I can make the cut. I just use my square and the bandsaw itself, and then just guide the wood through by hand. Before I can start cutting on the bandsaw, I'm going to make sure that everything is set up correctly, and that means I have to make sure that the blade is tensioned correctly, that it's tracking properly on the tires, and then I have to make sure that my guide blocks are set up properly so that the blade isn't going to twist while I'm cutting. And then finally, I need to make sure that the table surface is square to the blade so that the cut's going to be perfectly straight through the board and not going off at an angle. And speaking of blades, I'm not too particular when it comes to the blades that I use, except when I'm doing, when I'm cutting billets for book-matched pieces. In those, in that case, I'm using usually about a 1/4 to 1/2 inch wide blade with about 3 to 4 teeth per inch. This is an 1/8 inch wide blade and has 10 teeth per inch. And I like this blade because even when I'm making an angled cut through the board like this, I get a pretty clean cut, and I have very little to do after I've made the cut. So I've always been a big fan of these. So now I'm ready to make the cut. Okay, now as I just mentioned, the table is square to the blade. So the key is to make sure that the board doesn't tip to either side. And as I mentioned also, I don't use any jigs or fixtures, but to make sure that the board stays straight, I'm going to use my carpenter's square and just make sure that I keep that board square to the table as I'm running it through the blade. So I'm going to move the board to this side. And now we can cut. And that's the result right there. It's a perfect cut. So pretty simple to do. Now there are some teeth marks, some tool marks in there, and a little bit of curvature here at the end, but I can sand plane those out and get this surface very flat, very smooth before gluing the two pieces together. Now once I have cut that scarf joint, before I can glue it together, I have to smooth the surface, because even though I can get a pretty smooth cut with my bandsaw, there are still some saw marks and some teeth in it, and if I don't get rid of those, when I glue the two together and then later on when I carve out the neck, you'll see a pretty noticeable glue line. But if I can get a nice flat surface here for mating the two together, it will come out, that glue line will be very minimal at the most. So to do that, what I'll do is, if I have some fairly significant marks, I'll just use a plane, and I'll, with the blade barely sticking out of the bottom of the plane, I'll just scrape off that surface, and then I'll take a block of wood with some 80 grit sandpaper and I'll finish it, get it really smooth, and then I'm ready to put the two pieces together. And what I have to do is get everything lined up. Now obviously you can see I haven't put any glue on here yet, but what I'm going to do is I need to clamp this together, and then I'm going to drill 2 holes towards the outer edge, and then I'm going to use just some, I think these are just deck screws, and I will use those to hold the two pieces together while it's being glued. That way it doesn't slip and slide on me. So I just need to get this tightened down. I'm not too specific about where I'm drilling. I'm just trying to get the thickest part of both pieces of wood, and then make sure I'm far enough in that it won't crack the wood when I put the screws in. And I want to make sure that I'm going to be outside of the area of the neck shaft, which this piece of wood is probably almost 6 inches wide, and my neck is only going to be, at the net's going to be like 1 5/8, so it shouldn't be a problem. And then I'll just screw these in, and then I'll back them out again before we put the glue in. Another way that you can keep this wood from sliding when it's being clamped with the glue is to use a small amount of salt. But I find that because of a large surface area, it's better to use the screws. And then I'm just using regular, good old-fashioned Titebond wood glue. This is the original. I don't really bother too much with any of the other formulations that they have, because I find that this stuff works just fine. And I'll just make sure that I get plenty of it on the surface here. Then I like to use my pinky to spread it around. The reason why I use my pinky is because sometimes when you're working really fast with glue, you've got to spread it around and then grab bits and pieces that you're going to be working with. And if you're using your pinky to spread it, you're less likely to touch things, other pieces of wood with your pinky. So it's just a safer way to spread it using fingers. And then I'll just screw it down just like that. And this, not only does it pull the two pieces together, but it also keeps it from sliding. And then I can just start clamping it. And I'll put a few more clamps on there, and then I'll let this dry probably overnight. And tomorrow I'll be ready to, I need to get the truss rod first, because I need to measure the truss rod that I'm going to use for this. And even though I have an idea what those dimensions are going to be, I like to have that truss rod in my hands and measure it out so I know exactly what I'm getting. Because in general, truss rods are made by people in factories, and they're just welded from threaded rod and bar stock. So sometimes they can vary in their dimensions. So I want to make sure that I mark that out, and then I'll be able to throw this down my CNC machine and start cutting out the neck. Well, that's all the time I have for this episode. In the next episode, I'm going to take a blank, which I'm going to make from this piece of Chechen, and I'm going to make the fretboard. Once I have the fretboard, I will actually carve the neck from the blank and install the truss rod and bring those two pieces together. So until next time, have a great weekend, have a great week ahead, and don't forget to watch my quick tips for luthiers. I'll probably post one next Wednesday, and on the Friday following, I'll have the next episode from the Luthier's Workbench posted for you. So take care, and we'll see you soon.